you knew something was going on. You didn't know what. But the day of D-Day, got up. We had to go to the mess hall, which was a few miles where we usually rode bicycles down to eat. And we all said, I believe today is D-Day. We didn't know why. We just knew it was. It was really a well-kept secret. They had painted these planes and camouflage. It was fantastic what they did overnight to do that. So, of course, they landed on Omaha Beach, and I didn't get there till about D-Day 3, I think, something like that, because they had to put down airstrips so planes could land, not just fly over to drop supplies. But you had to land to pick up patients. I tell you, it was something every time you go to help one, they'd say, help my buddy first. He needs it worse than I do. You never saw anything like it in your life the way they did that. And we could carry 24 litter patients. The plane was constructed with web straps that were rolled up and hung up at the top so that you could get the supplies, and if you needed to have patients, all of our patients came in combat clothes. There was no just emergency treatment. And we were never, ever supposed to take tracheostomies. That's where they put a little tube in so you can breathe, because we had nothing to suction it with. They told us we would never carry it. Well, on my first trip, I had 6 tracheostomies. And I thought, oh dear, all we had is, these little tiny boxes of Kleenex. Well, we had a medical chest, but there was no way we could carry it. We also had a parachute, but there was no way we could carry that. So we had just a little medical kit that we carried with us, with emergency supplies. And I was always, I thought, well, I've got to turn them over so it can drain out. If I keep them alive, they may be able to do something for them. If I don't keep them alive, there sure isn't anything they can do for them. So I'd try to get these little Kleenex and reach in and get what I could with it. And we turned, my technician and I turned them, and I felt really, really bad that they had to do it. And when we got into our airfield, got back to our base, one of the girls had seen, everybody had tracheostomies. I don't know, there was a run on it. She saw one of the pilots cleaning his pipe with the pipe cleaner. Well, that was the end of the pilots ever having anything to clean their pipes with, because we got all the pipe cleaners that was in the PX. They were not to be given to anybody but us. So I don't think I ever had another tracheostomy after that first trip. And I was always worried that I would get a patient who somebody had missed a tourniquet, and I was always examining them to see if, whether they would lose a leg, because our trips were about an hour to an hour and a half from the battlefield to where we dropped them off. You don't know how long they'd been there before. And each patient had a tag on them with their name and what was wrong. And they were in 3 sections. You pulled the first section off and left it at the base, so that if anything happened, they'd know this is the thing that we made out. You won't pass that around? That's what we put that in. It had all the information on it that you needed. And we were supposed to have air cover, but we never did, because they needed that for the combat people. And we really weren't. The only time we really got over the enemy line is when somebody made a mistake. We were right behind them. We didn't fly over them. And the second one we took off and kept in the envelope for our records. And the third one went with the patient. And if you gave them any medication, any morphine or anything on the trip, and you were always very careful, because you didn't know what they got before you got it. And you didn't want to overdose it. But you would mark it on the back of that little tag so that the hospital would know what they got during their trip. And they were always afraid to, when they were up in a plane, because they were ground troops. and they'd had their feet firmly planted on the ground, and when they were up in the air, they felt insecure. You always had that to cope with too, but they were great. One of the first things they'd say is, "Lieutenant, what are you doing here?" Just like, "What are you doing out here this close to the lines," you know? And all the air evac, and the whole total amount of air evac people in both Pacific and in Europe was 250. And out of that 255 of them for my hospital, and I was very proud of that because they were pre-selected. And they liked to see long hair. And of course, we painted our fingernails, not so much because we wanted to rebel, it's because we didn't have any place to wash our hands. And if you put real red nail polish, you couldn't see the dirt. And so we let our hair grow, and of course, everybody else, you know, your hospital nurses and all, they kind of resented us because our hair was long, but that was one of the things that they loved to see, was it reminded them of home. It reminded them of things that were dear to them, not that it was us in particular, but it was the nostalgia. So they allowed us to have our hair long. And another thing they always wanted was a cigarette. One of the first things they wanted to know, the old cigarette time then. And I'm sorry to say, when I had German prisoners as patients, I didn't give them cigarettes. I saved my cigarettes for the Americans. My buddies, though, were more charitable than I was. They would give them cigarettes. I thought, you started this war, why should I give you a cigarette? You know, and then the pilots, they were all so proud of their air evac missions. They had a little red cross painted on the nose of the ship. If they had a paratroop dock, they had a paratroop there. And the ones that they were the most proud of was the air evac. Technically, the nurse was in charge of that plane. You know, we could order the pilot if we wanted to. Nobody was going to be dumb enough to do that. He had to get us where we were going. So you talked it over between you. Did you want to risk one life, or did you want to risk 25, 30, you know? And you made your decision that way. And the patients were really great. I've never in my life had such wonderful patients as those soldiers were, because they had been through the rough and they knew. And one day out of Paris, I had a mixed load. I had some Free French, this was towards the end of the war, Free French, Americans. I had a woman who had been a collaborator, and she was really carrying on. We had, they issued us these little French and German books. You know, if you had French or German, at least you could point to a word you knew in here. And I was always lucky. Only once did I have to use it. I was always lucky enough to have some patient that could speak English, which I think is a sad commentary on America, because we didn't know their languages. Anyway, I had this Free French man, and he was interpreting for me. He knew German, and he knew French, and he knew English, so I was fine. And this woman collaborator was somebody that really meant to do her in. And she was carrying on, raising Cain, crying. She wanted to stay in Paris, and the Free French man was really getting a little upset with me because I wouldn't take her off. And I thought he was going to get a little belligerent, and I told him, I said, she can't get off. She's a prisoner of war. I thought he was going to get up and do her in. You know, you go from one thing to another. And one time up in Belgium, Tito's men, you know, Tito was, I don't know, we got there to pick up patients, and instead we picked up a lot of these Tito's men who had been on the resistance of some kind, and they couldn't handle them in the hospital. They were ambulatory. We could carry about 27 to 29 ambulatory patients, 24 litters. And they put 2 nurses on the plane, as though 2 nurses could handle 29 drunken Tito men. You know? And they were really rambunctious. I thought, we're not going to get back alive because I think they would have taken over the plane. They were that way and they were drunk. Fortunately, I had one of them who was really, I guess, had been in charge. He was sober. So I got my sleeping pills out and stuck a hole in each end. Told them that I had to take 2 of them. I thought, I'm going to knock these guys out. And so I told them they'd get airsick if they didn't take them. They had to take these. And then I get down to him. Everybody else has got sleeping pills. He says, where's mine? Well, I thought, oh dear, I sure didn't want to give it to him, but I had to. I told him he only needed one because he hadn't been drinking. You know, so I got by with just giving him one. But were they angry with me when we landed because they had to bring in litters and get all those patients off. But we got in alive. When we were on transatlantic flights, I was in a plane crash in Newfoundland. It crashed on takeoff. I had a cold. Oh, I had the darndest cold when I went inland. I guess it was the change of atmosphere or something. But you know, you didn't have any Kleenex. You had a limited amount of handkerchiefs, and you washed them and you put them by that little stove to dry. And I've been on this flight into New York with patients, and this dear lady in the drugstore took one look at my sore nose and sold me 6 boxes of Kleenex, which she was not supposed to do, but she did. Well, we were always supposed to carry this with our records on our person in case a plane crashed. Well, I had it in my medical kit right at my feet. I thought, I have it right here, I'll pick it up. Only my medical kit strap got caught on the seat, and I couldn't get it loose, and he was a flight clerk, and I knew that he couldn't get off till he had everybody else off. And I thought, well, where I was, I couldn't see the fire. So I thought, well, I'll come back and get it, and I got off, and I saw that fire, and I took off. You know, you thought, oh boy, that gas is going to explode. And little old Lucy was a little chubby, and she was right in front of me. I didn't feel like my legs were moving at all, but she was gone, and I wasn't losing any of the. I was keeping right up with her, and she had bought some bourbon, which she liked her little nip every now and then. No drunkenness, and I'm standing there. My Kleenex, and she's standing there, my bourbon, instead of being glad we were alive. But fortunately, what happened was the landing gear collapsed, and it went up into the gas tank and drained it, so it didn't explode. The only thing that exploded was the oxygen, which was good. That didn't create too much of a hazard. And the doctor who was supposed to be on the flight line for any of this, he had the duty. He'd been carousing, and he came out. They'd stuck him in a shower to sober him, and he'd come out in a robe, still wet, and he put his arms around us. He said, "Don't you think you ought to be glad you're alive?" And we thought, yeah, maybe we should. Really, the wreck wasn't near as bad as the interrogation we had later. Either someone of the intelligence agencies interrogated every one of us. And when they got through with you, you felt like you had sabotaged that plane, you know? It was bad. I just don't think they needed to be quite that bad. You know, after PE Day, and that was really something, man. I tell you, those England and Scotland was good. Really, it was a celebration to end all celebrations. And we then, of course, started transatlantics in a big way to get the patients back to the States. The thing was to get these poor people back where they belonged, you know, and We weren't ever to carry body casts in the air. They were to go some other way. And the reason for that was if you had a ditch, if for some reason the plane was going down, you only had seconds to evacuate that plane, and with a body cast, you just wouldn't have been able to do it. Unfortunately, I had 6 body casts this time. You know, you get to feeling lucky after a while. You know, nothing happens, and you want to get them back. And, you just don't think of anything. And here I was with 6 body casts. We're over the Arctic, and we lost 3 engines. They sent out an SOS. They feathered the 3 engines, but there was no way at all anybody could have gotten to us in time. You know, because we would have frozen within 20 minutes. And I'm up there arguing with the pilot. Yeah, you know, crazy things. I'm saying I'm staying with the patients on the plane. My technician will go in the dinghy. And he says, I'm the pilot, you're going in the dinghy. I said, I don't care what you are, I'm in charge of this plane. I'm staying with the patients. You know, I'm not going to walk out and leave him go down. You know, but he wanted me to wake up the patients to get them ready for ditching. And I don't know why. Sometimes you just know something and you don't know how you know it. But I knew we weren't going to go down, and I wouldn't wake the patients. I told him I'm not going to upset him. And I guess maybe the lowering of altitude and getting into warmer weather or something. First one engine started, then another one, and then another one as we made it on into Newfoundland. And I was so glad I hadn't awakened those patients and gotten them all upset. You know, it would have been for nothing.